Ludum Dare 50 took place over the past weekend. It's probably one of the most well-known game jams out there, and it just passed its 20th anniversary with its 50th official game jam, so I knew I had to make something for it. Basically, the Ludum Dare has three main categories, being compo, jam, and casual. Compo is where you must work on your own and you only have 48 hours to make an entire game, including things like sprites and music. At the end of it, you also have to supply your source code. In comparison, the jam goes on for 72 hours and you can use any base code, pre-made assets, and can work in a team as well. Introduced in this jam is the casual category, where there's not as strict of a time limit, there's not really any competitiveness either, and it's pretty much there if you want to take a less stressful approach to the jam. I personally submitted to the jam category since I was somewhat busy on the weekend, so getting the extra third day as opposed to just 48 hours was enough breathing room for me to work with. In the end, I was actually really surprised with the final result of the game, and I was actually really happy with it, so be sure to stick around to see it. And without any further hesitation, let's jump right into making a game for the 50th Ludum Dare Game Jam. So the first thing I had to do for the game is, of course, come up with a plan for it. Since this is a game jam, I had to follow the theme, of course, so, the night the jam started, I was eagerly waiting on Twitter for the announcement, and the theme chosen was Delay the Inevitable. I'm gonna be straightforward and honest here. I originally really did not like this theme at all. When looking at some of the other potential themes for the jam, there were so many other ones that I thought would have been better. However, I think this only further improved my creativity for coming up with ideas for the game. Thinking about Delay the Inevitable, I thought it was a pretty dark theme, to be honest. I came up with some things like timer runs out equals death, X runs out of fuel, batteries running out, hunger eventually killing, and the end of the world. Yeah, all these are pretty dark ideas, honestly, especially the batteries one, like that is pretty messed up. However, after doing some hard thinking, I came up with some less dark ideas. First one regarded stalling food at some restaurant. Basically, you would play as something that would inconvenience some workers, and your goal would be to make as many customers angry as possible. The second decent idea I came up with was a micromanaging farm game. Basically, you would play as a farmer, and you'd have to keep your plants alive for as long as possible. I wasn't too sure how I'd implement a game over or win scenario here, so I scrapped it. The third idea I came up with was the one that I actually went with. You'd basically be stranded on an iceberg that is constantly sinking, and your goal would be to survive as long as possible. The catch is, other characters want to get on the iceberg as well, but it can only hold so much weight, so you'd basically have to shoot enemies off of it to keep it from sinking. Alongside this, you could use magic to basically heal the iceberg. The main goal for the game would be to survive a set period of time before you get rescued. Once you do get rescued, the iceberg would fully sink. Thus, you are essentially delaying the inevitable. Here's a rough gameplay sketch of this concept. Basically, the original plan was to play as some sort of wizard character, and have enemies hop out of portals trying to land on the iceberg. You'd aim and shoot with the mouse, and also be able to cast spell cards located at the bottom of the screen. I ultimately went with this idea because it felt a lot more lighthearted and fun to work with, rather than something much darker, like I mentioned before. So with this idea, I began actually making the game. The first thing I had to get down were the two main mechanics of this game, being the player's movement and the iceberg sinking. Within a few minutes, I had a build looking like this. There wasn't much done yet, but you could move and jump and the iceberg would constantly sink. Next, I had to work on the player's main shooting mechanic, which was really easy to do. I also made it so if you shoot the iceberg, it can actually rise a tiny bit. Thus, it creates some strategy between shooting enemies and the ground below you. Alongside this, I implemented the cards and just made it so whenever you hover over them, it fully shows what is on them. After this, I came up with a plan for each of the spells for the cards. The first spell would grant the player a shield. Not only does the shield negate any damage, anytime it is overlapping the iceberg, it will heal and make it rise. The second card would be a summoning card. Basically, you'd be able to summon a cloud or something that would drop down massive icicles that would both damage enemies and heal the iceberg. The final card would be an attack up card. In this case, I went with a rapid fire spell since I felt that could be satisfying to pull off. So, with those decided, here's what each one looked like in game. It was at this point I was tired of looking at all of these blank assets, so I decided I should begin creating some of the art for the game. The first two things I made for the game are the card sprites and the water sprites. Essentially, the top half of the card would be dedicated to showing you how much mana would be required to use it. Alongside these, I made a simple bullet sprite, a reticle, and an icicle, and imported all of these into the game. The game was starting to take shape, but one major thing remained. I needed a main character. I was originally going to make it just a simple wizard, but I was actually in a call with one of my friends when something struck me. They were discussing penguins, and specifically from Starbound, and that's when it hit. I should just make the main character a penguin. It'd make more sense for a penguin to be in the Arctic Ocean rather than some random wizard. So with that, I created this derpy little fella. Already the game felt like it had a lot more personality. With this, I also added in a health and mana bar, a proper sprite for the iceberg, and the win condition for the game. Basically, once the timer reaches a certain value, this UFO piloted by a penguin would come in from one side and abduct/save you. With all that made, I had one final main mechanic to make, which is the enemy mechanic. Basically, the way I wanted it to work is that the more enemies on the iceberg, the faster it would sink. I quickly was able to get this working with some placeholder art, and at the same time, I also updated the card summoning sprites. Next up, I needed a proper enemy and figured it should just be a different colored penguin. In this case, I chose red since it's pretty much the polar opposite of blue, and could be seen as a TF2 reference, I guess. I imported them into the game, and it looked really sick. However, I didn't really want them falling from the sky, so I decided that it would be much cooler if they actually hopped out of the ocean onto the platform. And that's exactly what I did. This change made the game feel a lot more polished, and I was actually really happy with how it turned out. With all the main mechanics made, I worked on creating a quick title screen with the name Penguin Panic because I love my alliteration titles. And alongside this, I made a how to play screen explaining the game's simple premise. After all of this, one massive aspect was missing, which was sound. I left sound to last because I figured I'd focus mainly on creating a fun gameplay loop at first, then worrying about sound after. I originally wanted to make all the tracks for the game myself, but ended up only having time to make a unique title theme. The main gameplay theme was taken from Open Game Art, a fantastic site that hosts a ton of assets specifically for game development. All the sound effects for the game were created using BFXR, a program that I've used many times before and absolutely love. You basically can instantly create sound effects with this, and it's super efficient. With the sound implemented, the game was complete, so I rushed on over to itch.io and made its game page. I also made a browser build of the game, but there are some small bugs with it, so it's not really the most optimal experience. However, I was able to submit Penguin Panic to the Ludum Dare site on time. Overall, I had a wonderful time participating in my first Ludum Dare. I think this is honestly one of my most polished titles, especially for being made in just 3 days. Everything feels satisfying, funny, and it came out exactly how I pictured it in my mind. I may not have liked the theme at first, but I think the end result proves that the theme was actually really good. If you want to play this game for yourselves, as always, there's a link in the description. I recommend you check out the downloadable version of the game. It's literally only 3 megabytes and is infinitely better than the browser build. Either way, go check it out and let me know your thoughts on it. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe with notifications on. It helps me out a ton and you'll be the first to see any future games that I make. As always, thanks for watching everyone, and I'll see you in the next one.